Hi, I'm Joe Nestor, and I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about gypsum. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I had previous commitment to a crop consultant conference out west. Our crop consulting business works in the tri-state area, primarily in the western Lake Erie Basin, and we deal with some heavy clay soils and some soils that are poorly drained. We use a management system on those soils where we take a close look at the calcium and magnesium in those heavy clay soils. So it's not just managing N, P, and K and pH. There's some other things in soils that you have to pay attention to. If you look here, the chemical side, the chemical portion of managing the soils would be the nutrients, but there's also the physical and biological properties of the soil, which probably have more of an impact on your bottom line in today's ag economy than perhaps the chemical side. Also, in an optimum soil, 50% of that soil would be pore space, of which half the pore space would be air and half the pore space water, and only 50% would be mineral. But these ingredients here I'll refer to as soil health. Now, 20 years ago, when the yield monitor came out, we began using the yield monitor to evaluate practices in the field, and several consultants got together and we determined that the number one thing that affects the number one thing that affects yield in the field is water. Too much, too little, and stress is brought on by moisture. So yield potential then could be described as minimizing stress to the plant and minimizing the duration of those stresses. And I'll give you an example. A 2-inch rain on a soil that is not properly managed for soil health can be a detriment and quite a stress to a young crop, where that same 2-inch rain on a soil field right next to that field, identical soils, could be a benefit and just drive the crop on. So clay soils, we do have to manage the pH. We want optimum pH so that we get chemical reactions that are beneficial to crop growth that happen with ease and often. And to manage that pH, we can use either calcium or magnesium. Both have a double plus charge and can be used to push hydrogen off the soil colloid and get the optimum pH. But those two products, calcium and magnesium, are distinctly different in the way they react with clay. Clays are made up of microscopic lattices or layers. I think a good way to describe that would be like a deck of cards. The lattices would be the cards of the deck, and then the nutrients or the cations, the positive charged cations, would be in between those lattices or in between the cards of a deck of cards. Now, granted, both can push hydrogen off the soil, but they are drastically different in the way they react with clay. Calcium is a much larger particle than magnesium, and it also has a property where it can flocculate clays or make building pieces or PEDs that are a good part of soil structure. Magnesium, on the other hand, with clays tends to disperse charged particles equally around it and can also peptize with clays and have a sealing effect and hold clays quite tight together. So really what I'm saying there, in a nutshell, you need to look at calcium and magnesium relationships in clays because it will really affect how water moves through your soil. And again, water is the number one thing in determining yield, and more importantly then, as water moves through soils, it pulls air in behind it, and air is a great benefit to the biological and physical properties of the soil. Now you can temporarily put air in a clay soil with tillage, but that's only temporary. Those clay lattices collapse back down and actually could be tighter, depending on the soil condition, be tighter than they were before they were tilled. How we use gypsum. Gypsum is calcium sulfate, and we use that product on high magnesium soils to leach the magnesium, or the smaller particle, down out of that top 6 inches or so, the real critical part where you can stress small plants easily. And so we use gypsum to leach the magnesium. This sulfate portion of gypsum is a double negative charge repelled by the soil, and as it moves down through the soil, we want it to take the small magnesium particle with it, the double plus charged magnesium, basically forming Epsom salts, and that's pretty soluble, and we want to leach that magnesium down so that those clay lattices then are held apart by the calcium particles and are wider apart so that water and air can move through that soil. Now, you have to have conditions that promote that leaching. Gypsum's not a silver bullet. You can't just throw it out there and it's going to cure everything. So we want to have soils that have adequate calcium and have a condition that we can leach that magnesium down. We also want to be careful about applying gypsum on sands or low exchange capacity soils. Those soils could already be low or marginal in magnesium, and we could actually strip magnesium out of those soils to where you would be short for crop production. You got to have a good soil test database so that you track where you're going with this relationship of calcium and magnesium. Some other benefits to gypsum: you can use it as a sulfur source. With the impact of no acid rain for crop growth, we are seeing sulfur levels fall quite drastically, so that it would be a good source of sulfur. And we're also looking at it as a retention material for dissolved reactive phosphorus. The calcium portion of the gypsum can lightly bond with phosphorus and hold it within the field so that it doesn't leave or enter the waterways. And we're doing some plot work with that. You might ask what rate you use for gypsum. Well, that is dependent upon exchange capacity. The higher exchange capacity you have, the more rate you need to make that adjustment. And you also need to know how much clay is in that soil, and you don't really have a great handle on that. So let's compare gypsum to a firecracker. We basically throw that at high clay soils with high magnesium levels, give it a year to work, basically 15 inches of rain per ton of gypsum, and to get some activity there, and then we come back and check those soils again and see if we're getting the desired level of magnesium related to calcium. So we use a ton per acre on our 15 to 20 exchange soils, and we may get down to 1,000 to 1,500 pounds at our 12 to 15 exchange soils. So in summary here, by managing the calcium and mag relationship within these clay soils, and gypsum is a great tool to do this with, as well as high calcium lime, we want to improve water infiltration. We also want to minimize stress on the crop due to water movement. We want to enhance the biological and physical properties of the soil by moving water and pulling air in there. And also I think this pairs up real well with cover crops. By using cover crops with this type of system, you can speed this process along. We also can get better nutrient efficiency because we have the ability to grow a larger root system and recover a larger percent of those available nutrients in the soil. Let's add a couple things here. You might be able to work these in to that video somewhere. How do soils get high in magnesium? Well, a couple different ways. Over the years, farmers may use dolomite lime when they already have plenty of magnesium in those soils. And this can get that large particle calcium to small particle magnesium relationship out of whack. So you can raise those magnesium levels by applications of the wrong lime. You can also have soils that are inherently high in magnesium to begin with. A lot of the lake bed soils that were prehistoric Lake Erie have high magnesium levels. They hold a lot of water, they don't let a lot of water pass through them. But you can also adjust those soils and that relationship and open them up and make them a better, healthier soil and easier to manage. We've taken some soils that have had high magnesium levels, tough to get stand establishment, tough to get water through them, delayed planting, poor stands, and we've changed those soils by using this type of management to where we can get an adequate stand and we can get water and air into those soils, make them a very healthy soil, and made some really productive soils out of them. Once you get the stand established, usually you have water available there in those clays. So good management techniques can really help improve the productivity of those heavy clay soils.